worked intake at Greenview Counseling from 2019 to 2022. It was my first job out of grad school, not glamorous, but necessary. I answered phones, scheduled appointments, managed the filing system. The kind of work you do while you're working toward your clinical hours. Greenview was a mid-sized practice. 12 therapists, maybe 300 active clients at any given time. We kept paper files in addition to the digital system. State requirement. The files lived in a locked room behind the reception area. I was in there multiple times a day. In August of 2021, I started noticing something odd about the intake forms. Every new client filled one out. Standard procedure. Name, date of birth, emergency contact, presenting concerns. The forms were color-coded by year, blue for 2019, yellow for 2020, green for 2021. They were filed alphabetically within each year. I was reorganizing the 2020 files one afternoon when I saw a yellow form for someone I recognized. Daniel Riordan. He'd been coming in since March of that year. I'd spoken to him dozens of times, helped him reschedule appointments, processed his insurance. The form listed his emergency contact as his wife, Sarah. I knew Daniel wasn't married. He'd mentioned his divorce multiple times in passing, waiting room, small talk, that sort of thing. He'd told me his ex-wife lived in Oregon. He talked about how the separation affected his daughter's visitation schedule. I assumed it was an old form he'd filled out before the divorce was finalized. People forget to update that information. It happens. But when I checked the date on the form, it said March 12, 2020. And in the section labeled Current Relationship Status, he'd checked the box for single. I stared at that form for longer than I should have. The handwriting was definitely his. I'd seen him sign credit card receipts. But he'd written Sarah Riordan under emergency contact and checked single on the same page. I told myself he'd made a mistake. Muscle memory, maybe, or he'd been distracted. I put the form back and didn't think about it again until 2 weeks later. That's when I was filing an intake for a new client named Vanessa Torres. She was scheduled to start seeing Dr. Kemper for anxiety. The form was standard. Everything looked fine. But when I filed it, I noticed another green form directly behind it, also for Vanessa Torres. Same name, same date of birth, same address. 2 intake forms, both dated within the same week, August 9th and August 12th. The information was nearly identical, except for one section. On the first form, under "Have you previously received mental health treatment?" she'd checked no. On the second form, she'd checked yes and listed Greenview Counseling as the provider. That didn't make sense. If she'd been a client before, she wouldn't have needed a new intake form. We had a separate form for returning clients. And if she had been seen here previously, it would have been before August 9th, so why would the first form say no? I checked the digital system. Vanessa Torres had one client record, one intake date, August 9, 2021, no prior appointments, no prior therapists. I pulled both forms and compared them side by side. The handwriting was identical, same pen, same pressure. It wasn't like someone had forged one of them. I brought it to my supervisor, Alina. She looked at both forms, then checked the computer. She shrugged. Probably filled one out, realized she made a mistake, asked for another one. It happens. Just keep the most recent and shred the other. That would have made sense if the dates were different. But they were only 3 days apart, and Vanessa's first appointment wasn't until the 16th. Why would she have come in twice to fill out intake paperwork? I didn't shred the first form. I kept both of them filed together. After that, I started paying closer attention. Over the next month, I found 4 more duplicate intake forms. Different clients. Same pattern. 2 forms, same person, filled out days apart with small contradictions in the information. One client listed 2 different emergency contacts. Another changed their answer about prior hospitalizations. A third listed different medications. I started checking the files more carefully whenever I had downtime. I went back through 2020, then 2019. I found more duplicates. Not many, maybe one in every 30 or 40 clients, but enough to establish a pattern. The thing that bothered me most was that the handwriting never changed. It wasn't like someone had filled out a form, gone home, and returned later with different answers. The pen was the same. The writing style was the same. It looked like the same person filling out two forms in the same sitting, but providing contradictory information. I asked Alina again. I showed her 3 examples. She was less patient this time. She said people are inconsistent. People misremember things. People change their minds about what they want to disclose. She told me to stop overthinking it and focus on my actual job. I tried, but then I found my own intake form. I'd started working at Greenview in May of 2019. I'd never been a client. I'd filled out employee onboarding paperwork, but not a client intake form. The form was blue, dated June 14, 2019, my handwriting, my signature. Under presenting concerns, I'd written recurring dreams, sense of repetition, difficulty distinguishing memory from projection. I had no memory of writing it. I'd never experienced those symptoms. I didn't have recurring dreams. I didn't see clients. I wasn't licensed yet. I took the form to Alina. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "You filled this out during your onboarding. We have all staff complete one for training purposes." I told her I didn't remember that. She said it was 2 years ago and that I probably wasn't paying close attention. I didn't argue, but I knew she was wrong. I would have remembered filling out a client intake form, and I would have remembered writing those specific words. That weekend, I went through the employee files. I had access because I handled HR paperwork for new hires. Every staff member had a blue intake form dated within a week of their start date. Therapists, administrative staff, even the cleaning crew. All of them had filled out client paperwork. I asked 2 of the therapists about it on Monday. Casually, I said I was trying to remember the onboarding process for a procedure manual I was updating. Neither of them remembered filling out an intake form. One of them looked at me like I was confused. She said, "We don't do that. That would be a dual relationship issue." I pulled her file that afternoon, blue form, her handwriting, dated April 2018. I stopped asking questions after that. I kept working, I kept filing. I tried not to look at the forms too closely. But I started noticing something else. Clients would come in for their appointments, and sometimes they'd look at me like they didn't recognize me. Not new clients, people I'd been scheduling for months. They'd approach the desk and hesitate, like they were trying to remember if they were in the right place. And sometimes, when I'd greet them by name, they'd look relieved, like they'd forgotten it. One afternoon in October, Daniel Riordan came in for his usual Thursday slot. I smiled and said, "Hi, Daniel. Dr. Paulson's running about 10 minutes behind." He nodded, then he said, "Have we met before?" I thought he was joking. I laughed and said, "Every week for the past 1.5 years." He stared at me, not like he was confused, like he was trying to decide something. Then he said, "Right, of course, sorry, long day." He sat down in the waiting area, but he kept glancing at me, not suspicious, more like he was trying to confirm something. His appointment lasted 40 minutes. When he came out, he stopped at the desk. He said, "I need to update my emergency contact information." I pulled his file. I asked him what needed to be changed. He said, "Remove Sarah, put down my brother Michael." I updated the digital record and made a note to update the paper form. I asked if he wanted to fill out a new intake sheet. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "No, that's fine, just update the contact." After he left, I went into the file room. I pulled his yellow form from 2020. The emergency contact section was blank. No Sarah, no Michael, just an empty line. But I'd seen Sarah's name there. I knew I had. I don't work at Greenview anymore. I left in January of 2022. I told Alina I'd found a better opportunity, which was true, but it wasn't the whole reason. Before I left, I went into the file room one last time. I pulled my blue intake form from 2019. Under presenting concerns, the section was blank. I don't know what I wrote there. I don't know if I wrote anything at all. But I remember reading it. I remember those words. Sometimes I think about going back, asking to see the file again, confirming what's there now. But I don't think I want to know what I'd find.